Hey guys, tonight we begin our slow journey into Constantinople, the shining capital of Byzantium. And here, that's the strange part. Despite being one of the most documented cities in the medieval world, historians still can't agree on how it really worked at street level. Some describe an orderly imperial metropolis, perfectly organized under its laws and rituals. And others insist that Constantinople was a chaotic giant whose daily life ran on improvisation, noise, and stubborn citizens who followed rules only when it suited them. This contradiction, a city known for order but built on constant negotiation, is a large part of what makes it so endlessly fascinating. Before we slip deeper into the day, picture the first light rising over the Golden Horn. Soft silver blue reflections stretching across still water. The creaking of docked ships, the quiet clatter of bakers lighting their ovens, and the faint smell of sea salt mixing with warm bread. The streets are still damp with dawn, the stone walls still cool, and the city breathes in slowly, preparing for its long, crowded, brilliant day. And let's be honest, a modern person wouldn't last here very long. The heat alone would flatten most of us by noon. The noise would fray nerves within an hour, and the mix of fish smell, incense, tar, wet rope, sheep wool, and street food would convince many travelers to turn back before breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you re-listening from and what time it is for you. It's always calming to see how many of us drift into the past together from different corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Morning rises slowly over Constantinople, the kind of slow that feels intentional, as if the city prefers to gather itself before fully waking. At first, there's only a faint shift in the darkness, a thin silver glow stretching across the Golden Horn, like a quiet thought. The water lies cool and perfectly still, reflecting early light and soft, trembling ripples that spread outward from the hulls of anchored ships. A guard stands near the edge of a wooden pier. His cloak is heavy with night moisture, its wool stiff from salt carried inland by the breeze. He draws it tighter around his shoulders and watches the faint glimmer spread across the water. The air tastes of brine tar and the cold iron tongue of morning. Behind him, the city makes its first noises. Not speech, not footsteps, just the soft stretching of a place uncoiling from sleep. A fisherman down the pier casts his net with the silent precision of someone who has done this since childhood. The net lands with a soft rush. A seagull cries overhead, sharp enough to cut the quiet in two. Another answers. Soon, a whole chorus awakens, as if the birds consider themselves the official heralds of Byzantium. The guard shifts his weight and feels the stone pier beneath him, releasing the last of the night's cold. His armor creaks softly. Somewhere behind him, another guard yawns with such honesty that it echoes off nearby warehouses. Dawn reveals that even in the capital of an empire, moorings belong to the tired. A historical fact flickers through the guard's thoughts. Constantinople's harbors are among the busiest in the known world. Grain from Egypt, wine from Greece, furs from the north, spices from the east, all of it passes through the Golden Horn. He sees only silhouettes now. But he knows that in a few hours the docks will become a thunder of voices, ropes, crates, and impatient merchants. For now, the silence is a blessing. He turns from the pier and walks along the narrow street, climbing upward from the waterfront. The stones beneath his boots are slick with dew, shining faintly in the newborn light. Water collects in tiny channels between the stones, left over from the night's condensation, shimmering like threads of metal. The scents change as he moves inland. Salt and seaweed fade into the background, replaced by the early warmth of baking bread. Bakers have already begun lighting their ovens. A soft orange glow spills from a half-open doorway. Someone inside coughs, then mutters something that is either a curse or a prayer. Possibly both. Bread making before sunrise is not for the faint-hearted. A lesser-known detail lives in the guard's memory. The price of bread is fixed by law, so bakers sometimes wake long before dawn to stretch the dough with clever mixtures of barley or millet. Not enough to cheat, just enough to survive. The guard does not blame them. Life in an imperial capital is expensive, even for those who feed it. He continues upward, passing a row of wool-draped stalls. The wool hangs like sleepy ghosts, heavy with dew. A cat watches him from beneath a wooden bench, its eyes glowing faintly in the half-light. Cats here are treated with respect, bordering on reverence. After all, they protect grain stores better than any soldier. The guard nods to it. The cat blinks slowly, granting brief approval before returning to whatever feline philosophy occupies it at dawn. As the guard ascends, the light strengthens. It pours gently across rooftops, catching on the curves of distant domes and the straight lines of tiled homes. Golden reflections shimmer along the city walls. The architecture awakens like a giant mosaic, gaining color piece by piece. A monk sweeps the courtyard of a nearby monastery. Each movement of his broom is slow, rhythmic, and strangely calming. The bristles whisper across the stone. The monk does not look up when the guard passes. Dawn is his time, and he treats it with the quiet seriousness of someone polishing the floor of a sacred hall. High above them, the great chain on the water, the one raised at night to protect the harbor, glints faintly in the rising sun. Historians will one day debate whether the chain was always so effective or only ceremonially important. But seeing its massive links shimmering in morning light, the guard finds the question amusing. A chain that large does not need to work. It merely needs to exist. He reaches a high terrace overlooking the Golden Horn. The city spreads before him, ships rocking gently on the tide, columns and domes emerging from shadow, smoke rising from bakeries and workshops, the faint echo of a temple bell carried by the breeze. Morning takes its time here, unfolding like a long silk curtain. The guard breathes deeply. Day has begun. Quietly, softly, inevitably, Constantinople wakes. The guard steps away from the terrace and moves deeper into the waking city. Here, inside the protective embrace of the massive Theodosian walls, the streets begin narrowing into a warm, lived-in maze. Dawn light slips between rooftops in thin golden slices, stretching across stone paths and catching in puddles left from the night's condensation. The stones are smooth underfoot, worn by generations of sandals, hooves, carts, and hurried bureaucrats who always seem to be late for something. The first shutters open with a sequence of soft wooden clicks. A woman pushes hers outward to let the morning air in. She squints toward the growing light, mutters a greeting to no one in particular, and begins shaking out a woolen blanket. Dust drifts down in gentle clouds. The guard sidesteps it politely. In Constantinople, falling dust is not an attack, it is a greeting. Further along, a baker slides open the heavy wooden hatch of his stall. The smell that seeps out, warm dough, toasted crust, smoke from olive wood, is enough to momentarily soften even the guard's expression. A tray of round loaves sits cooling on a counter inside, their tops split open like tired mouths sighing into morning. He passes by without stopping, but he slows his steps just a little, letting the scent follow him like a promise he chooses not to claim yet. A group of porters gathers near a warehouse. They lean against the wall, rubbing sleep from their eyes, shifting the straps of empty baskets across their shoulders. They speak in low voices, trading half jokes only people this tired would find amusing. One complains about his back, another about the rats. A third insists the rats complain about him. The guard walks past them, hearing their laughter fade behind him. Early morning humor is softer, rounder, as if even jokes prefer to stretch and warm up before ticking into sharpness. A historical fact crosses his mind. The narrow inner streets of Constantinople were intentionally winding. Builders claimed it helped control wind drafts from the sea and offered shade during hot days. Whether the design was planned or simply the organic chaos of an old city is something historians still debate. Some say the twisting layout was a defensive tactic. Others say it was just what happens when people build houses first and ask questions centuries later. From one alley, a merchant emerges with a broom in hand. He sweeps the stone threshold of his shop, making careful, meaningful strokes. Not because the threshold is actually dirty, though it is, but because sweeping at dawn is a silent declaration. My day begins now. May it be prosperous enough to justify waking up this early? He nods politely as the guard passes. The guard returns the gesture with the same silent sincerity. Both understand that mornings are contracts between intention and reality. Near a crossroads, an older man pours water from a clay jug onto the stones, tamping down the dust. The water darkens the ground, releasing a brief aroma of wet earth. A donkey tied nearby stares at the scene with mild disapproval, as donkeys tend to do. The animal flicks its ear with the slow annoyance of someone who did not approve the schedule change. The guard moves deeper still. Tall homes with wooden balconies lean slightly inward toward each other, creating a shaded corridor that traps cool air. Laundry lines stretch between windows, shirts, linens, and long strips of cloth swaying gently. A woman adjusts one of the lines, tugging it with practiced strength. She gives the guard a quick look, the universal morning look of someone measuring how awake she needs to be to deal with potential trouble. Satisfied, he presents none. She returns to her chore. A cat darts across the street, chasing something invisible. It skids slightly on the damp stones, regains composure, and pretends it meant to do that. Cats of Constantinople are masters of dignity, even at dawn. They accompany bakers, guards, fishmongers, monks, anyone with a chance of spilling food. The guard steps over the cat with the courtesy owed to an animal that believes itself co-ruler of the empire. Somewhere above, a child's voice breaks into a high, excited shriek, followed by a lower, stern voice shushing it. Morning routines have begun, children being dressed, scolded, washed, or bribed into quiet. A clay pot clinks as someone sets it onto a windowsill. Bread dough thumps softly as it's kneaded. Wooden beads click between fingers in a quiet prayer. A lesser-known detail whispers through memory. Constantinople woke in layers. The harbor first, then the street vendors, then the artisans, then the aristocratic homes. The guard is walking through the second layer now, the part of the city that is awake, but still soft, still stretching, still shaping its intentions. He approaches an intersection where a fountain trickles gently. A man in a coarse tunic fills a jug, then splashes water over his face. He shivers at the cold. The water here is fresh, drawn from aqueducts threading through the city. Ancient, silent arches that carry life into every quarter. Historians still debate which aqueduct supplied which district. Records are inconsistent, and Constantinople's geography shifts over centuries with fires. Rebuilding and political whims, the guard dips his fingers into the basin. The water is cold enough to pinch the skin. He lets a few drops fall across his palms, rubbing them together. Morning grit loosens. Sleepiness fades. Farther ahead, a man opens a spice stall's shutters. A faint perfume escapes into the street. Warm resin, crushed coriander, dried citrus, faint smoke from incense burned the night before. The guard inhales without meaning to. Spice sellers never truly smell of one thing. They smell of all things at once. It is a scent that confuses the senses in a pleasant, hazy way, like standing near a dream that hasn't decided what it's about yet. A donkey cart rumbles into view, its wooden wheels clattering against the stones. The driver sits slouched, reins loose in hand, humming a tune that sounds as tired as he does. The donkey gives a single, resigned bray. Morning in Constantinople is a negotiation, and the donkey is already losing. Shadows shrink as the sun climbs, and the guard steps into a wider street where traffic thickens, porters carrying baskets, women with jars balanced on hips, apprentices running errands, monks walking in pairs with steady strides. Voices rise in small, quiet waves, greetings, requests, muttered complaints about sore backs or bad sleep. The city is no longer stretching. The city is waking. And the guard feels it, the shift from stillness to movement, from breath to heartbeat. Day has truly begun inside the walls. The guard steps out of the narrower residential lanes and into streets that widen toward the heart of morning commerce. The light is stronger now, forming clean golden angles along walls and rooftops. Ahead, the city opens into the edges of the market district, not yet loud, but unmistakably alive. Constantinople wakes faster here than anywhere except the harbor. Stall owners lift their wooden shutters in rhythmic succession. The sound, a rising sequence of thuds, creates a kind of accidental music across the district. Dust drifts from the shutters as they open, settling on counters that will be wiped again in minutes. Early merchants step into the street, stretching arms stiff from sleep, adjusting belts, rolling shoulders. The guard watches them with the calm resignation of someone who has seen the same ritual every day of his adult life. A worker drags a crate across the stone pavement. The wood groans under the weight of whatever is inside, likely dried figs or dates, judging by the faint sweetness trailing behind it. Nearby, a woman arranges ceramic bowls in neat rows, her hands moving quickly, tapping the rims to check for cracks. The bowls ring softly, as though each is announcing it survived the journey from the kill. The smells of the market rise slowly into the air. Cured fish, fresh vegetables, warm sesame, crushed herbs, olive oil poured into large clay jars. A merchant lifts the lid of a jar and stirs the oil with a wooden ladle. Thin waves of scent escape into the morning, sharp and grassy. The guard can almost taste the bitterness that always clings to newly pressed oil. Historical fact: olive oil was one of the most essential goods in Byzantine markets. It was used not only for cooking, but also for lighting lamps, preparing medicines, and producing soaps. The guard walks past a row of shop fronts displaying copperware. Pots, ladles, and kettles hang from hooks, their surfaces catching the morning light. A smith inside one shop sharpens a blade on a grinding wheel. Sparks scatter briefly before fading against the cool stone floor. The steady rhythm of metal against stone echoes out into the street, not loud, not harsh, but confident. To one side, a man heats pitch in a small iron pot. The smell is sharp and smoky. He dips the end of a staff into it, turning it carefully. When he lifts it, dark resin clings to the wood in thick, sticky lines. Staffs like this are sold to travelers, pilgrims, and anyone preparing for a long walk beyond the city walls. A group of apprentices jogs down the street, carrying baskets piled with folded cloths. Their sandals slap against the stones. They dodge a cart, then an early customer, then each other. One stumbles but manages to keep his balance after an undignified hop. The guard watches them pass, noting the familiar chaos of youth employed in a city that demands efficiency but rarely inspires it before noon. He moves farther into the district as the volume rises. Voices bounce between stone walls, greetings, prices, short instructions barked by merchants. The sound builds gradually, like the city taking its first real breath. Historical fact: Constantinople's main market areas were tightly regulated by officials known as agoranomoi, who inspected weights, measures, and prices. Violations could result in fines or confiscation of goods. Ahead, a man arranges small pyramids of fruit on a wooden table. The fruits shine with moisture, washed moments earlier from a bucket that still rests at his feet. He glances at the guard, nods once, and returns to shaping the neat formations. The guard notices a few figs that already sag from the morning warmth. The merchant quietly moves those to a side basket. No one in this city wants to be known for selling bad figs. Reputations here are stubborn and long-lived. A potter, his hands already dusted in clay, sits beside a cart loaded with jugs and bowls. He taps one jug with the tip of his finger. The hollow sound he listens for tells him whether the walls are even. He sets aside one jug that sounds duller than the rest. A flaw, perhaps. He places it gently on the ground, not wanting to attract attention. The guard pretends not to see. Merchants deserve their small dignities. Nearby, a man roasts sesame seeds in a shallow pan. He stirs them with a wooden paddle, releasing a warm, nutty smell that spreads down the street. A child appears from somewhere, nose lifted toward the scent. He inches closer to the pan. The man catches him before he gets too bold and hands him a single pinch of freshly roasted seeds. The child beams, pops the seeds into his mouth, and vanishes as quickly as he arrived. Historical fact: sesame was widely used in Byzantine cooking, appearing in breads, sweets, and sauces. It was a common and affordable flavoring, especially in urban markets. The guard turns a corner and enters the first major artery of the market district, a long street, lined with arcades that offer shade even during the brightest hours. Merchants prefer these shaded stretches. Customers linger longer in cooler places, and lingering leads to buying. A historian debate exists about this district. Some sources describe separate market zones for specific goods, spices in one area, textiles in another, metalworkers elsewhere. Other records hint at a more mixed arrangement, where categories blurred and merchants grouped themselves according to convenience rather than strict order. Archaeological evidence supports both possibilities, making the exact layout uncertain. The guard walks beneath the arcades. The stone columns rise evenly along the path, their bases worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Above them, wooden beams stretch overhead, catching dust that falls in slow spirals. A merchant sweeps his portion of the arcade with fast, irritated motions. More dust falls with every stroke than he removes. He pauses to wipe sweat from his brow, though the morning is still cool. This city, he mutters to no one, makes dust out of stone itself. The guard cannot disagree. Constantinople produces three things without pause: noise, trade, and dust. As he continues forward, the street opens into a broader square, the true heart of the market district, where the next stage of the day will unfold. The noise grows louder. The people grow more numerous. The city grows more awake. The day is beginning to accelerate. The guard enters a narrower passage where the air grows warmer and heavier, as if the street itself exhales different scents from every stall. This is the Spice Arcade, a long shaded corridor where the smells arrive before the merchants do. The morning light filters in through slatted wooden awnings, creating bands of gold that illuminate dust motes drifting lazily through the air. Each step deeper into the arcade feels like stepping into a different climate. A merchant unlatches a heavy chest and lifts its lid. A wave of scent escapes immediately. Sharp pepper, dried citrus peel, cracked coriander. The merchant leans back with a practiced motion, letting the aroma cool the air in front of him before he begins arranging his jars. He taps the lid once, out of habit rather than necessity, and sets the chest aside. Historical fact: pepper was one of the most valuable spices in Byzantium, and was often used as partial payment in trade agreements, wages, and taxation. The guard walks past jars filled with saffron threads, so bright they seem to glow on their own. The merchant handling them moves with surprising care, using 2 fingers to lift the fragile strands from a linen pouch and drop them into glass containers. Each movement is slow and deliberate. Saffron is valuable enough to demand gentleness. A man 2 stalls over pound cinnamon sticks with a wooden pestle. Each strike releases a warm, sweet aroma that spreads down the arcade. The sound is steady, rhythmic, almost soothing. The guard pauses near the stall as the merchant empties the crushed cinnamon into a shallow basket. A few pieces fall to the ground. The merchant sighs, picks them up carefully, and dusts them off. Spices are too valuable to treat casually. A woman works at the next stall, grinding dried ginger on a stone slab. Her hands move with quiet efficiency, pushing the ginger back and forth until it becomes a pale, fragrant powder. She lifts the slab and tilts it so the powder slides neatly into a jar. She glances at the guard briefly, then returns to her work. Morning is not a time for conversation. It is a time for preparing the day. The guard inhales deeply as he steps into the center of the arcade. The air here does not smell like one thing. It smells like everything layered at once. Dried mint, ground cumin, resin, clove, anise, and smoke from last night's incense that still clings to the wooden beams. The mixture is dizzying at first, then strangely comforting. A man holding a scale steps into view. He calibrates the balance by placing small bronze counterweights onto one side and a handful of cumin seeds on the other. His brow furrows when the scale tips unevenly. Historical fact: Byzantine commercial regulations required merchants to use standardized weights known as litre, approved by city officials. Penalties for using inaccurate measures could be severe. The guard watches as the merchant adjusts scale again. This time, the balance is perfect. The merchant nods, satisfied, and begins measuring spices for a waiting customer. To his left, A stall displays blocks of incense, frankincense, myrrh, and resinous mixtures imported from the Red Sea and further east. The block surfaces glisten faintly in the light. A monk in a dark robe examines the resin with a precise, practiced gaze. He breaks off a small piece, tests its hardness between his fingers, and nods in approval. Historical fact: incense was used not only in churches, but also in homes to cover the smells of cooking. Livestock and crowded living quarters common in urban neighborhoods. Farther along, a merchant lifts a sack filled with dried bay leaves. The movement releases a cool, herbal scent that rolls across the walkway. The guard stepped through the drifting aroma, feeling it cling faintly to his cloak. A donkey stands tethered near the wall, its saddlebag stuffed with bundles of herbs. It shifts its weight and snorts softly, unimpressed with the early hour. A young assistant unloads the bags, pulling out bundles of lavender, rosemary, and dried oregano. He arranges them quickly, then brushes the stray leaves from the donkey's flank. The donkey flicks an ear toward him without gratitude. The guard continues deeper into the arcade, where the light grows dimmer. Lamps burn here even in the day, their flames small but persistent. Shadows ripple across rows of jars stacked in tall wooden cabinets. The cabinet surfaces are worn smooth from constant use. He pauses near a stall selling powdered mixtures, blends of spices meant for soups, sauces, or medicinal pastes. A woman scoops a bright red mixture from a container and pours it into a folded paper packet. The powder forms a vivid line against the pale paper. Historical fact: Byzantine physicians frequently prescribed space-based remedies. Texts from the period list mixtures using pepper, cinnamon, cumin, and galangal for digestive and respiratory ailments. The guard steps aside as a group of apprentices rush through the arcade carrying bowls of freshly ground pepper. They weave between merchants with surprising precision, though their expressions show the strain of trying not to sneeze. Anyone who works with pepper knows the struggle. One breath too deep, and the morning becomes a torment of stinging eyes and coughing. A historian debate concerns the layout of the spice arcades themselves. Some argue that the arrangement followed a formal urban plan dating back to late Roman designs. Others believe the arcades grew organically around areas where spice merchants informally gathered over generations. Excavations provide evidence for both claims, leaving the exact origins unresolved. The guard emerges from the darkest section of the arcade and steps into a brighter stretch where sunlight falls through a gap in the awning. Particles of ground herb drift through the air, glowing briefly in the beam before settling. Merchants finish arranging their stalls. Customers begin to appear. The day is ready to begin earnest. And the spice arcade, warm, heavy, fragrant, breathes into motion. From the warmth of the spice arcades, the guard steps into a broader passage where the air immediately feels different, lighter, cooler, and carrying the faint scent of dye, soap, and freshly beaten linen. The cloth halls stretch ahead in long, orderly lanes, each lined with stalls, displaying fabrics that catch the morning light and turn the street into a shifting mosaic of color. Compared to the spice corridor, this place feels calmer, more deliberate, as though every bolt of cloth insists on being admired before anything else can happen. A merchant unrolls a length of silk across a wooden counter. The fabric glides forward in a smooth, shimmering wave. Its surface reflects gold in one direction and deep blue in another, depending on how the light strikes it. The merchant tilts it slightly, satisfied with how it gleams. Historical fact: Byzantine silk production was a tightly controlled imperial industry. After silkworm eggs were smuggled into the empire in the 6th century, Constantinople developed some of the finest silks in the world. The guard pauses, watching the silk ripple. He has no need for such luxury. His cloak is sturdy wool, made for durability, not beauty. But even he can appreciate craftsmanship when it moves like water. Farther down the lane, a dyer lifts a dripping bolt of cloth from a large clay vat. Steam rises from the vati's surface, carrying a sharp scent of minerals and plants used in a dye. The cloth glows with a deep, rich red, the kind that stains hands for days. The dyer hangs it carefully over a wooden beam to dry, his fingers already darkened from earlier work. A shallow basin at his feet catches the excess dye. The liquid inside is so opaque it looks almost solid. Historical fact: certain dyes, especially red and purple, required expensive ingredients such as madder root or murex shellfish. These dyes were used for garments associated with wealth and status. A tailor arranges tunics along a line, each one displayed on a simple wooden stand. The tunics vary in material: fine linen, sturdy wool, cotton imported from the east, and occasional pieces with embroidered borders. He smooths each garment with careful strokes, checking for loose threads or creases. His assistant follows behind him, brushing stray fibers from the stands. Nearby, a weaver operates a large vertical loom. Wooden beams rise above him, supporting rows of taut threads. His hands move quickly but predictably. Lift, pass, press, tighten. The loom creaks with each movement, a rhythmic sound that echoes softly under the hall's arched ceiling. The guard watches as the pattern emerges thread by thread, a bordered design of interlocking leaves in alternating shades of brown and green. A pair of merchants argue quietly over the quality of a linen shipment. One insists the weave is too loose for what was promised. The other claims the looseness is intentional, meant for a lighter summer garment. Their disagreement remains polite, but the guard can tell by their gestures that neither plans to concede easily. On a nearby table, bolts of Egyptian flax lie neatly folded. The cloth has a faint grassy scent, as though the fields it came from still linger in the fibers. A woman sits behind the table, smoothing the edges. She glances up briefly, meeting the guard's eyes, then returns to her sorting. The movement of her hands is efficient. Practice, she could probably fold cloth in complete darkness. A young apprentice struggles to lift a crate of wool from a cart. He manages it, though his face contorts into an expression that suggests he regrets every life choice leading to this moment. The wool is packed tightly, forming a dense white cloud inside the crate. A few tufts escape and drift through the hall like tiny wandering spirits. The apprentice swats at them half-heartedly. The guard walks deeper into the cloth halls where more valuable goods are displayed. Here, silk is embroidered with gold thread, brocade hangs in thick fold, and patterned cotton from distant lands is stacked in careful piles. One merchant unfurls a tapestry depicting a hunting scene. The threadwork is fine enough that the muscles of the animals appear mid-motion. Two onlookers lean closer, tracing the outlines with their eyes. A man nearby stirs a pot of boiled soap and oils used for finishing fabrics. The mixture bubbles slowly, releasing a waxy, herbal smell. He dips a piece of cloth into the solution with a long stick and pulls it out again. The treated fabric shines faintly, water sliding off its surface instead of soaking in. In the far corner of the hall, a woman sits at a low bench embroidering a cloth with blue and gold thread. Her needle moves in precise arcs. Every few minutes she leans back, studies the pattern, and continues. She works without rush. Embroidery is slow by nature, and speed ruins beauty. Her hands carry the calm patience of someone who understands this fully. As the guard passes her stall, he notices a display of children's tunics, simple cotton garments with narrow decorative borders. They hang in a small row like tiny, earnest attempts at adult fashion. He has seen them before. In other mornings, in other stalls. Somehow they always make the market feel more human. A historian debate concerns the organization of the cloth halls. Some records describe a highly ordered layout separating weavers, dyers, and tailors. Other sources imply a more flexible arrangement, with craftsmen shifting spaces as trade demands changed. Excavations provide evidence for both patterns, so the exact structure remains uncertain. The guard reaches the end of the hall where sunlight pours in from a wide opening. The beams hit the fabrics, igniting them briefly in warm colors: gold, violet, crimson, emerald. For a moment, the entire hall seems to glow. People begin to gather. Customers, apprentices, merchants. The sound rises gently, voices blending with the creak of looms and the soft thud of cloth being laid out for inspection. The morning moves forward, and the cloth halls breathe into life. Leaving the cloth halls behind, the guard enters a district where sound replaces scent as their dominant presence. Here, the air vibrates with the steady clink of metal, the tapping of chisels, the rasp of files smoothing wood, and the soft thud of mallets striking stone. This is the artisan's quarter, a place where the city's beauty is not admired, but built piece by piece, hour by hour, by hands practiced enough to turn raw material into something enduring. The guard steps onto a street lined with workshops. Most of the doors stand open, letting morning light spill across workbenches covered in tools. Inside each workshop, someone is already bent over a project, absorbed in the deliberate repetition that defines skilled craft. A jeweler sits cross-legged near the doorway of his stall. Before him lies a narrow bench cluttered with tiny metal fragments, fine wires, and small bowls of polished stones. He holds a thin strip of silver in one hand and shapes it with a file no larger than a quill. His movements are so precise they seem almost delicate. A tray beside him displays rings and pendants arranged in tidy rows. Byzantine jewelers frequently used cloisonne enamel, a technique involving metal partitions filled with colored glass paste, then fired to create vivid designs. A blacksmith works a few stalls down. Heat radiates from his furnace in slow waves that distort the air around it. He grips a glowing piece of iron with long tongs and places it on the anvil. The hammer rises, falls, and rises again. Each strike echoes through the district, a sound that forms the steady heartbeat of the artisan lanes. Sparks burst outward, faint and brief, before dying on the cool floor. The guard watches a moment as the shape of the metal changes, lengthening, narrowing, curving. The smith dips it into a tub of water, and steam surges upward. The hiss spreads down the street like a warning or a sigh. Next to the smith, a wood carver sits at a low bench surrounded by shavings that curl like thin pieces of parchment. He works a block of cedar with a chisel, carving interlocking geometric patterns that repeat in tidy symmetry. He pauses occasionally to blow away dust and check the depth of the lines. His workshop smells of resin and wood smoke. Several carved boxes sit finished on a shelf, their lids fitting so smoothly that lifting them creates a soft pop of displaced air. A mosaic maker kneels in another stall, arranging tiny tesserae, squares of stone, glass, and ceramic, into a shallow frame. He uses small tweezers to place each piece. Blue, gold, white, red, one after another. The image is not yet clear. It looks like scattered fragments with only the faintest hint of a figure emerging. But the guard knows that given time, the mosaic will come to life. Mosaics were central to Byzantine visual culture, decorating churches, baths, palaces, and public buildings. Workshops often specialized in producing tesserae of uniform size and color. A scribe sits at the far end of the street inside a narrow shop lit by 2 oil lamps. Despite the daytime, he prefers the steady glow of controlled light. A stack of parchment lies beside him, and he works with a fine-tipped reed pen dipped in ink made from gall and soot. Each stroke is slow and steady. His fingertips are stained dark from handling ink pots. A young assistant cuts vellum sheets with a knife, the blade gliding across the table's smooth surface with a soft whisper. Historical fact: scribes in Byzantium often worked in commercial scriptoria, producing documents, books, and icons for private patrons as well as the church. The guard steps aside as a potter rolls a cart toward his workshop. The cart carries freshly fired clay vessels, still warm enough that thin trails of vapor rise from their surfaces. The potter removes one gently, tapping it with a finger to listen to the sound, a hollow ring indicating that the walls are evenly formed. Satisfied, he places it inside his shop. Another vessel gives off a dull sound when tapped. He frowns and sets it aside. A flawed pot might crack after just one winter. Nearby, an icon painter sits before a wooden board coated in white gesso. In small bowls beside him lie pigments made from ground minerals: malachite green, cinnabar red, lapis lazuli blue. The painter mixes a pigment with water and egg yolk to create tempera, stirring slowly. He touches the brush to the surface and draws the first thin lines of what will eventually become a saint's. Byzantine icons were commonly painted in egg tempera on wooden panels, following established formulas and proportions passed down through generations. At the entrance to a different workshop, an older craftsman sharpens tools on a whetstone. His hands are steady, his movements economical. When he finishes, he wipes the blade with a strip of cloth and tests its edge against a piece of leather. It slices cleanly. He nods, satisfied. A historian debate concerns whether these artisanal districts were formally organized into guild-like associations, or whether workshops operated more independently. Some surviving documents reference artisan groups with defined rules, while other records imply a looser commercial structure. Evidence remains mixed. Further along, 2 copper workers polish bowls and plates. One holds a large basin, rubbing it with a paste of ash until the surface shines brightly enough to reflect light from the street. The other stacks polished plates in ascending order of size. Their hands smell of metal and acid, a scent they accept as an unchanging part of the craft. A narrow alley branches off, leading to dye workshops where vats of boiling color soak wool and silk. The steam carries the smell of minerals and plants mixed together in strange, heavy combinations. Workers stir the vats with long poles, their arms darkened by dye that never fully washes off. Everywhere the guard looks, hands are working, stitching, carving, shaping, scraping, filing, beating, smoothing. Each motion is purposeful. Each craft builds a piece of the city that someone else will wear, use, admire, or pray before. The artisan's quarter does not shout like the markets or echo like the harbor. Instead, it hums. A steady, continuous hum, the sound of a city making itself. The guard walks through it, knowing this rhythm as well as he knows his own heartbeat. By the time the guard reaches the public square, the day has shifted entirely. The gentle coolness of morning is gone, replaced by sunlight that hits the stones with a clean, bright force. Heat rises from the pavement in soft ripples. The air feels thicker here, caught between tall buildings that trap warmth like walls of a kill. Constantinople never eases into midday. It arrives abruptly, without apology. The square is already crowded. Pigeons gather near a fountain, strutting with the confident entitlement of creatures who know the city belongs to them as much as anyone. A few hop onto the rim of the fountain, pecking at breadcrumbs left from early vendors. The fountain's water trickles steadily, a thin, constant sound that seems almost too calm for a space this busy. People cross the square in every direction. Messengers hurry with rolled parchment tucked under their arms. Market women carry baskets balanced effortlessly on their hips. Monks walk in pairs, their sandals slapping softly against the stone. A pair of stable boys leads 2 horses through the crowd, muttering under their breath as the animals resist the noon heat. No creature in this city welcomes midday, not even the ones bred for labor. Near the fountain, 2 men argue over the placement of a stall. Their disagreement is not loud, but their gestures grow increasingly sharp. The guard does not intervene. Market disputes rise and fall like tides. They usually resolve themselves long before anyone officially steps in. A row of vendors begins preparing food for the midday rush. One grills fish over a brazier, the skin crackling as it meets the heat. Another slices cucumbers and arranging them on a wooden board. A woman pours ladles of lentil stew into clay bowls, steam curling upward. The smells, smoke, herbs, toasted bread, and something faintly sour mix into the familiar midday perfume of the square. The guard pauses near a man selling olives. The olives gleam in broad ceramic bowls, deep purple, green, and a pale shade dusted with herbs. The vendor spears one olive with a toothpick, lifts it toward a customer, and watches for the reaction like a performer waiting for applause. He passes by a group of laborers resting in a patch of shade. One man holds a cloth dipped in cool water against his neck. Another fans himself with a piece of parchment. They speak lazily about the heat, how it feels heavier this year, how the sun seems closer, how the stones burn through the soles of their sandals. Complaints about weather are a universal language, understood by every class from fishermen to court officials. At the center of the square stands a large stone column topped with a statue. The guard looks up briefly at the figure, an emperor from a century earlier, arm raised in a gesture of eternal command. The sunlight makes the statue appear brighter, almost sharp at the edges. The guard shifts his gaze away. Statues watch the city more faithfully than many officials. Certain areas of the square offer shade from cloth awnings stretched between buildings. People gravitate toward these spaces, moving slower, lingering longer. The overlapping fabrics create a shifting patchwork of color overhead, turning the light beneath them into something softer. At one shaded stall, a man sells fruit, figs, apples, pears, and a few precious lemons kept in a bowl of cool water. The guard notices the lemons immediately. Citrus fruit is not rare, but good. Fresh citrus is memorable. A boy tries to reach into the bowl, but the vendor swats his hand away gently and points toward the cheaper figs instead. The boy sighs and accepts the compromise. A group of musicians prepares to play near the edge of the square. One tightens the strings of his lyre. Another taps a small drum, checking its tone. A third wipes dust from a reed flute. Their presence is a sign that midday has fully arrived. Musicians rarely appear at dawn, but often gather when the sun is at its peak, and people need distraction from the heat. The guard moves toward the fountain. Water glints as it falls, catching sunlight in small flashes. The surface of the basin is decorated with faint carvings, geometric patterns, and plant motifs, softened by centuries of touch and weather. He dips his hand into the water. It is warm near the surface, but cooler beneath. He lets the water run across his fingers, then wipes his hand on his tunic. A scribe walks past, balancing a stack of documents carefully. Ink pots clink softly in a pouch at his belt. He moves quickly, weaving between people with the precision of someone who has spent years navigating crowds without spilling a drop of ink. His face glistens with sweat, but he does not slow. Across the square, two women spread cloths on the ground and begin arranging pottery for sale. They place bowls, cups, and pitchers in circles, each group sorted by size and glaze. A few pots wobble on the uneven stones, and one woman adjusts them until every piece sits steady. Pottery must look dependable, even if the stones beneath it are not. A debate among historians concerns how strictly vendors were assigned positions in public squares. Some sources suggest that specific trades held established spots, while others imply that locations shifted daily depending on arrival time and available space. Evidence from municipal records is inconclusive, leaving the organization of market squares open to interpretation. A flock of pigeons suddenly lifts as one, wings flapping in a brief commotion. A child runs after them, laughing. His laughter echoes off the stone walls, bright and clear. His mother follows quickly, murmuring apologies to anyone he nearly collides with. The guard steps aside as a cart passes through. Its wheels rattle loudly over the stones, and the donkey pulling it switches its tail in irritation. The driver mutters encouragement, though the donkey responds with a stubborn silence typical of its kind. A man selling cold water stands beneath a shaded archway. He ladles water from a ceramic jug into a clay cup, handing it to a tired-looking customer. The guard knows the water is likely drawn from a cistern fed by the city's aqueducts. These aqueducts, some centuries old, supply Constantinople with water through an extensive network of underground channels that stretch across the city. More vendors arrive, and the square grows louder. Voices rise in overlapping waves. Someone calls out prices. Someone else negotiates. A donkey brays. A pot clanks. A musician begins to play a slow melody on the lyre, the sound spreading calmly across the noise like a thin sheet of cool shade. Despite the heat, the guard continues walking across the square. His steps remain steady. He has spent years moving through the city at all hours, in all seasons. Midday heat is just another part of the rhythm. As predictable as the morning fog over the Golden Horn, he reaches the opposite side of the square, where the air feels slightly cooler. A breeze drifts between two buildings, carrying faint hints of sea salt. He pauses there, letting the breeze touch his face, even if only briefly. The square behind him continues to swell with movement and sound. People gather, trade, talk, eat, rest, argue, and laugh. Constantinople, at midday, is a city fully awake, bright, noisy, warm, and endlessly alive. The guard moves forward. Another part of the day waits for him. By the time the guard reaches the bathhouse district, the heat has settled over the city with full weight. The streets leading to the baths carry a mix of familiar midday scents: warm stone, dust, baking bread from distant ovens, and the faint mineral smell rising from water channels hidden beneath the pavement. The bathhouses offer relief from all of it, and the guard steps toward one of the larger establishments, a domed structure with small round windows scattered across its curved roof. The entrance stands slightly recessed, creating a pocket of shade that feels noticeably cooler. Two attendants sit just inside the doorway, sorting bundles of towels and folded linen cloths. One nods as the guard enters. The other continues folding, aligning each cloth with calm precision. Inside, the temperature shifts instantly. Warm air moves through the entry hall like a soft tide, scented with olive oil soap, damp stone, and traces of steam drifting from deeper within the building. The floor is laid with smooth marble tiles that reflect thin lines of light entering through high wall slits. Men sit along benches in the apoditerium, the changing room loosening belts, removing sandals and placing their belongings into shallow wooden cubbies. Low conversations fill the room, subdued exchanges about prices in the market, tired remarks about the heat, brief updates on neighborhood gossip. Nothing that requires concentration. The bathhouse is not a place for serious debate. It is a place for shedding the weight of the day. The guard finds an empty space on a bench and removes his cloak. He places it neatly beside a folded tunic and steps toward the next room. His boots click softly against the stone. Warmth increases as he enters the tepidarium, a chamber designed to ease the body into the hotter rooms. Steam hangs lightly in the air, softening the outlines of benches and columns. A basin sits at the center, filled with warm water that glows faintly under the lantern light. A man ladles water over his shoulders, letting it run down his arms and chest before scooping another bowl. Certain bathhouses used water heated by furnaces beneath the floors. Hollow spaces called hypocausts allowed hot air to circulate under the stone, creating an even warmth that spread upward through the walls and floors. The guard steps farther inside. Condensation forms on his skin almost immediately. He sits on a bench and lets the warmth sink into his muscles. The sounds around him, dripping water, shifting feet, occasional low murmurs, blend into something steady and calming. An attendant walks past, carrying a tray of small clay jars filled with scented oils. He places the tray on a low table and begins applying oil to a patron's shoulders with slow, practiced motions. The scent drifts across the room: rosemary, pine resin, and something sweet and earthy. Nearby, a man scrubs the marble floor with a brush, pushing water into narrow channels carved into the stone. These channels guide excess water toward drains connected to underground cisterns. The floor remains warm even under the water, a reminder of the hidden furnace below. The guard stands and moves toward the hot room, the caldarium. The heat thickens here, wrapping around him immediately. Steam rises in continuous waves, filling the high domed ceiling and gathering around the narrow windows. The dome amplifies the sound of dripping water, creating a faint echo that turns each drop into a tiny, distant footstep. A large marble basin sits beneath a bronze spout where hot water pours steadily into the pool below. The guard steps closer and dips his hand in. The water is nearly too hot to tolerate at first, but slowly it becomes bearable. A few men sit on the pool's ledge, lowering themselves gradually, inhaling through their teeth as the heat presses against their skin. Certain bathhouses use separate basins for different temperatures, allowing bathing to follow a sequence from warm to hot to cold. This pattern was considered beneficial for circulation and cleanliness. A man nearby jokes that the water is hot enough to cook a fish. His friend replies that if the fish tasted like the bathwater, he would prefer hunger. Their voices echo lightly across the chamber. Even humor slows down in the heavy steam. The guard finds a place along the heated marble bench and sits. The warmth radiates through the stone directly into his back and legs, easing the tightness built during the morning. A drop of condensate falls from the dome above and lands on his arm with a soft hiss. The sound is so quiet that it seems more imagined than real. An attendant approaches with a curved bronze strigil tool used for scraping oil and dirt from the skin. The attendant gestures toward the guard, who nods. Oil is poured across his shoulders, spreading warmly across the skin. The strigil glides over the surface in long, slow motions, gathering residue with each pass. The metal is cool at first, then warms quickly. Olive oil, often mixed with herbs, was commonly used in bathhouses as a cleansing agent before being scraped from the skin. Nearby, someone scoops water from a basin and pours it over his head. The water splashes across the marble floor, steaming instantly. Another patron sighs deeply as an attendant massages his shoulders with firm, steady pressure. After some time, the guard stands and moves toward the cooler rooms. His steps echo softly through the corridor. The air cools gradually as he transitions from the caldarium to the tepidarium again, and then toward the frigidarium, the cold room. When he enters the frigidarium, the coolness wraps around him like a shock. He inhales sharply. The pool here is shallow and clear, its surface nearly still. He steps down into it. The cold bites at his skin, but after the heat of the previous chamber, the sensation feels clean and refreshing. Cold baths were considered important for closing the pores and completing the bathing sequence. Some bathhouses also use snow stored from winter months in shaded pits, adding it to the water during summer. The guard stands in the water until his pulse steadies. Then he steps out, letting droplets roll down his arms and legs. He collects a linen cloth from a nearby attendant and dries himself slowly. When he returns to the changing room, sunlight has shifted. It glows more directly through the high windows, creating patterns on the floor. Men zip up tunics, gather sandals and tie belts. Conversations remain low and calm. The bathhouse leaves people soften, limbs loose, thoughts quieter. The guard retrieves his cloak. It feels lighter now, as if the steam and heat have chased off the morning chill. He steps through the entrance, out of warm air and back into the brightness of the noon street. The heat outside is still formidable, but his body accepts it more easily. The bath has reset the day. He walks on. The guard steps out of the bright street and back into the inner corridors of the bathhouse, moving through the sequence of rooms where temperature, sound, and atmosphere shift in deliberate stages. These transitions are as much a part of the ritual as the bathing itself. The architecture guides the body from heat to coolness, from heaviness to clarity. He enters the first of the intermediate chambers, a warm room where the air carries a gentle humidity. The temperature here is neither intense nor mild, just warm enough to soften muscles and extend the lingering calm of the hot bath. Marble benches curve along the walls, their surfaces smooth under the touch. A few men sit resting, their bodies wrapped in thin linen cloths. No one speaks loudly. Even conversation respects the quiet rhythm of the place. The walls of the chamber rise into a domed ceiling supported by shallow arches. Light enters through small round windows near the top, scattering into soft, diffused beams that make the air appear slightly hazy. The room smells of olive oil, damp stone, and traces of herbs, remnants of balms applied in earlier stages of the bath. An attendant pours warm water into a shallow basin. Steam rises briefly, then dissolves. The attendant dips a cloth into the basin and wrings it out with practiced ease. The cloth drips a thin line of water onto the floor, joining a network of faint channels carved into the stone to guide moisture away. These channels lead toward drains that connect to underground cisterns. The guard sits on one of the benches. The warmth is pleasant, the kind that loosens the back and shoulders without overwhelming the senses. He leans forward slightly, elbows on knees, letting the quiet settle around him. A man nearby adjusts a band around his head, smoothing his hair back. Another stretches his legs slowly, wincing as a stiff muscle finally gives. Linen cloths scrape softly against the marble as patrons shift. Every sound is muted, absorbed by the warm air. He rises again, moving through a narrow archway into another chamber. This one is cooler. The temperature drops enough that the skin feels it immediately, tightening slightly. The transition is deliberate, a step down from the heat toward the clarity of the final cool hall. A large marble basin stands at the center of the room, filled with water that reflects the light from high openings. The surface is smooth and still. A man cups water in his hands and splashes his face. Droplets fall back into the basin in tiny concentric rings. Some bathhouses arrange their rooms in long sequences from hottest to coldest, creating an intentional cycle for patrons to follow. This progression was believed to improve circulation and support overall health. Two attendants speak quietly near the far wall. One hands a folded towel to a patron preparing to leave. The other stacks jars of oil in neat rows. Their movements are efficient, carried out with the detached focus of people accustomed to the routine. The guard continues through another passage. The walls here are damp to the touch, evidence of the constant heat and moisture that move through the building. He brushes his hand lightly along the surface. The stone feels cool despite the humidity. He steps into a wide hall, the cooling chamber. The temperature is significantly lower now. Cool air enters through an arrangement of vents positioned along the upper walls. The vents face shaded exterior courtyards where breezes circulate naturally, allowing air to flow inside without bringing in dust or heat. The cooling hall is quiet in a different way than the warm rooms. Sound seems to linger longer here, echoing lightly before fading. Footsteps produce soft, measured taps against the stone. The guard walks across the floor, feeling the coolness rise through the solace of his sandals. A few patrons recline on long marble benches. Their heads rest on folded cloths, eyes closed. Breathing slowed. This room is the pause between heat and the outside world, a place to let the senses reset after the heaviness of the hot baths. One man lies still, with a thin film of water drying on his skin. Another rubs his arms gently, encouraging the lingering heat to disperse. A third sits with his back against the wall, fingers tracing the lines etched into the marble behind him. These lines form simple geometric patterns, triangles, arcs, symmetrical vines that decorate many bathhouse interiors. A basin sits at the far end of the hall, filled with cold water. Not as cold as the frigidarium, but cool enough to refresh without jolting the body. A patron dips a jug into the basin and pours the water over his chest. The sound of the water striking stone echoes through the hall with a soft reverberation. The guard moves toward a window slit overlooking a shaded courtyard. Through the narrow opening, he sees a cluster of fig trees casting wide leaves across the ground. The leaves tremble slightly in a breeze he cannot feel from inside. Beyond the trees, the dome of another bathhouse rises, a smooth curve of stone against the bright sky. He takes a slow breath. The air inside the hall feels almost clean. The warm chambers loosen the body. This room clears the mind. A debate among scholars concerns the specific order and layout of rooms in Byzantine bathhouses. Some archaeological sites show strict sequences from hot to cold, while others reveal more flexible arrangements, adapted to local needs or building constraints. An attendant approaches carrying a tray of drinking cups. He offers one to the guard. The cup is filled with cool water flavored faintly with mint. The guard drinks, the coolness spreading quickly through his chest and into his limbs. He sets the cup on a low shelf and nods in thanks. He stands for a moment, letting his body adjust fully before returning to his cloak and clothing. The bathhouse has slowed his thoughts, softened the tension between his shoulders, and given him a brief separation from the heat outside. When he steps through the final doorway, the sunlight feels different, not harsher, but clearer. The breeze from the street carries dust and warmth, but his skin still holds the memory of the cool chamber behind him. The guard places his cloak over his arm and walks into the afternoon. The city waits. The guard steps back into the streets as the afternoon heat settles across Constantinople like a heavy cloak. The sun hangs high, bright enough to flatten shadows and bleach the edges of every building. Even the breeze that drifts in from the water feels warm, carrying the sense of tar, seaweed, and meals cooking in distant homes. His body is cooler after the bath, but the warmth of the streets quickly reclaims him. He moves toward the heart of the market district again, where the rhythm of the city returns to him in familiar waves. The clatter of carts on stone, the call of vendors, the hum of overlapping conversations. Afternoon brings a different kind of activity than morning. The early rush of setup has passed, replaced by the steady flow of customers seeking food, supplies, and small comforts. The first thing he notices is the smell stronger, now fuller, bread still warm from ovens, fish grilled over braziers, honey heating in clay pots until it bubbles gently. Figs split open on wooden boards, their centers glistening in the sun. The scents layer over one another, shifting with every step. A vendor at the corner fans a brazier with a palm leaf, coaxing the flames higher. On the grill, small fish sizzle, the skin curling back to reveal white flesh beneath. He sprinkles herbs over them, and a cloud of fragrant steam rises. A line of customers waits patiently, bowls in hand. The guard continues walking, letting the smell drift behind him. Another vendor slices flatbread with quick, confident motions. The bread is stuffed with onions, greens, and a salty cheese that melts slightly from the heat. He hands one to a waiting customer who bites into it before even stepping aside. Food sellers in the afternoon tend to crowd the open spaces of the markets, filling them with the aroma of cooked meals. Many residents eat their largest meal at this time, choosing dishes that are simple, affordable, and eaten standing. The guard moves deeper into the square. A woman sells honey pastries from a low table, the pastries dusted with sesame seeds and glistening with syrup. Children gather around her, trying to decide which piece largest. She cuts each pastry with a small knife, placing them into thin paper containers that she folds neatly. Near her stall, a man carries a tray of figs, offering samples. Each fig is soft, the skin thin enough that the fruit seems ready to burst. He waves one toward the guard. The guard gestures politely, but does not stop. The man shrugs and continues calling out to passers-by. A group of merchants sits under a canvas awning, arranging jars of wine from the countryside. They discuss the quality of this year's grapes, comparing flavors and weather patterns. One insists that the early heat improved the sweetness. Another argues that the dryness spoiled the vines. Their debate continues without resolution, as it has for years. On a side street shaded by tall buildings, an elderly woman sells nuts in small woven baskets. Almonds, walnuts, and pine nuts lie in tidy piles. She cracks open a walnut with a small wooden tool, checking the freshness before handing it to a customer. Her hands move slowly but confidently, each motion deliberate. A potter displays cups and bowls painted with simple geometric patterns. Customers turn them over, tapping the bases lightly to check durability. A few bowls ring with a clear tone, convincing buyers quickly. Others give a more muted sound. Those are gently set aside. The potter keeps a careful eye on the process, answering questions with nods and brief comments. The guard walks past a stand where pickled vegetables, cucumbers, carrots, garlic, and olives float in large jars filled with brine. The jars reflect sunlight in distorted patterns. The vendor pulls samples from the jars with long tongs, placing them onto small plates for customers to taste. A sharp, vinegary smell spreads through the air. Pickled foods were common in Byzantine markets, especially in warm seasons when fresh produce spoiled quickly in the afternoon heat. He moves on to a section of the market where textile sellers display cloths repurposed into clothing or simple bags. A tailor fits a tunic onto a customer, adjusting the shoulders and sides with careful pinches. The man checks his reflection in a polished bronze disc and nods in approval. As he continues, the guard passes a man selling herbs for cooking: dried mint, thyme, oregano, and fennel bundled neatly. The herbs rest in shallow wooden trays. Customers lift them, crushing a leaf between their fingers to release the scent before purchasing. The vendor keeps a cloth over the herbs to protect them from the sun. At the edge of the market, a small crowd gathers around a storyteller, sitting on a raised stone. He speaks in a steady, animated tone, describing the exploits of a long-dead general. His hands carve shapes in the air. Children sit closest, leaning forward with bright eyes. Adults stand behind them, listening while pretending not to. Storytelling in public markets was a common form of entertainment, especially in the afternoon when the shadows grew longer and people slowed their pace. The guard watches briefly before moving on. Afternoon brings a certain softness to the market, fewer sharp voices, fewer hurried steps. The morning's urgency has burned away, leaving a calmer rhythm that encouraged browsing, tasting, listening. A historian debate concerns how much regulation control these afternoon food stalls. Some documents describe strict municipal oversight of food quality and location, while others suggest a more flexible system where vendors move freely depending on demand. Surviving evidence points in both directions. He walks toward the outer edge of the market where a small fountain trickles steadily. A boy fills a jug from the fountain, then splashes some of the water onto his face, shivering. He laughs, shaking droplets onto the warm stones. A dog approaches the fountain, lapping water from a shallow groove carved into the basin. Shade stretches across the pavement as the sun begins its slow descent. The colors of the market soften reds and yellows dimming into muted tones, shadows lengthening around stalls and awnings. The guard steps into one of these shaded areas, letting the cooler air settle around him. The afternoon crowd continues to thicken. Voices lift and fall in waves. The smell of roasted fish lingers. Cloth rustles. Laughter breaks from a group of young men seated on the steps of a storefront. This is the market at its most relaxed, busy, warm, and drifting toward evening. The guard leaves the shaded edge of the square and continues onward. The day carries him forward. The guard moves away from the afternoon markets and steps onto the broadest, busiest artery of Constantinople, the Mese. Even at this hour, when the day is shifting toward evening, the avenue feels alive in a way no other street in the city can match. Its long stone path stretches forward between tall buildings, lined with colonnades, statues, and arches. Everything about the Mese declares its importance. The first sensation is sound. Not chaotic noise, but layered activity. Hooves clatter, sandals slap, wheels creak. Voices blend into a continuous rolling hum. A messenger shouts for room as he runs past, holding a sealed document high in the air. A pair of elderly men walk slowly beside the columns, deep in a discussion that seems older than both of them. A wide procession makes its way down the street. A group of soldiers walks at the front, their armor catching the light with each step. Behind them, officials in long, decorated garments carry staffs topped with carved symbols. Even without banners, their presence is unmistakable. The guard steps aside to let them pass. People on the street pause, watching briefly before returning to their errands. The Mese served as the primary ceremonial and commercial street in Constantinople, connecting major districts, forums, and palaces across the city. Small shops line the colonnades. A vendor sells parchment and reed pens. Another offers leather sandals arranged in neat rows. A third sells polished bronze mirrors that reflect the afternoon sun, so brightly they seem almost too sharp for the eyes. The guard walks past each, observing without stopping. Near one of the archways, a man sharpens a long knife on a whetstone. The scraping sound repeats in steady rhythm. Water drips from the blade onto the stone floor. A small crowd has gathered nearby, not to watch the sharpening, but to listen to a wandering preacher delivering a short lecture about humility. His voice rises above the crowd in smooth, practiced tones. But half the listeners appear more interested in the shade provided by the arch than in the sermon. A group of monks walks in the opposite direction, robes brushing softly against the pavement. They carry baskets filled with bread, distributing pieces to the poor gathered along the colonnade. The men and women who receive the bread nod in gratitude, some clutching the loaves immediately to their chests. A line of horses passes by, led by a stable hand who mutters instructions the animals ignore. Dust rises from their hooves, caught briefly in the sunlight before drifting away. One horse flicks its tail at a persistent fly, causing the stable hand to stumble sideways. He regains his balance without ever losing his grip on the reins. The guard moves along the street past the Forum of Constantine, where the remains of older statues stand in the center. The column rises tall above the square, its carved drums showing centuries of wear. Several children chase each other around the base of the column while a vendor nearby sells chilled drinks flavored with herbs and pieces of fruit. The drinks are weakly sweet and mildly refreshing, enough to convince people to buy one, but not enough to make anyone forget the heat. Farther down the Mese, an official wearing a tall hat checks waits at a merchant stall. The merchant hands him a scale, looking nervous. The official measures the weight of a handful of grain, compares it to a small bronze counterweight, and nods. The merchant visibly relaxes. Officials regularly inspected goods along the Mese to ensure fairness in trade. The guard steps aside as a carriage rumbles past, its wheels leaving faint lines of dust behind it. Inside, a noblewoman reclines on a cushion, her garment embroidered with gold thread. Two servants sit on the bench beside her. The carriage moves slowly, partially because of the crowds and partially because moving quickly through the Mese is nearly impossible at this hour. Two boys run past, weaving between adults. One holds a wooden hoop, rolling it along with a stick. The laughter between them carries lightly through the air. Their game ends abruptly when a street dog blocks their path. They stop short, startled. The dog yawns unimpressed and wanders away. The boys resume their game. Further ahead, a row of shops displays goods from afar. Amber beads from the north, glass vessels from Syria, carpets from the east patterned with symmetrical designs, small wooden icons painted with vivid pigment. A merchant rubs a bead between his fingers, holding it up to the sunlight to prove its authenticity to a potential buyer. Some sections of the Mese contain wide-open areas used for public announcements or imperial ceremonies. The guard passes one of these expansions, where a crier stands on a raised platform reading aloud a new proclamation. The crowd listens with varying degrees of interest. A few nod, a few frown, most simply drift on. A historian debate concerns the exact shifting boundaries of the Mese over the centuries. Fires, reconstructions, and political changes altered parts of the avenue, leaving scholars to piece together its original path from incomplete records. Shops on the west side of the street sell cloth awnings and rope-useful items for merchants who want to create shade or secure goods. A man climbs a short ladder to tie a new awning above his stall. The fabric billows once in the breeze before settling into place. He steps back, studies the angle, and nods, satisfied. Street dogs move lazily between the columns. One curls up in a shaded corner, resting its head on its paws. A young girl approaches and gently brushes dust from its back with her hand. The dog does not move, only sighs softly. The guard continues along the Mese as the sunlight begins to shift in tone. Its brightness fades slightly, picking up warmer hues. Shadows stretch longer behind pillars and walls. People still walk with purpose, but their pace has slowed. Even the busiest avenue in the city begins to relax as afternoon leans toward evening. Vendors arrange their goods for the final rush of the day. A few already gather their supplies, tying cloths around bundles and securing the shutters of their stalls. Street cleaners move through, pushing brooms across the pavement. Dust swirls around them in low clouds. The guard steps into a wider clearing where the Mese forks toward different districts. Lamps remain unlit for now, but their metal fixtures catch the sunlight in dull glints. The air carries a faint trace of the sea again, mixed with smoke from household stoves, preparing evening meals. This street, the great artery of the city, has carried everything today: merchants, pilgrims, officials, animals, children, carts, soldiers. Now begins the slow, subtle shift toward its evening character. The guard continues on. Constantinople stretches ahead, moving into the next chapter of the day. As the guard leaves the branching paths of the Mese, the city's energy begins to change. The noise of vendors and carts fades gradually, replaced by a quieter rhythm shaped by wide streets, tall walls, and long stretches of orderly colonnades. This district leads toward the Great Palace, a vast, layered complex that dominates the political and ceremonial life of Constantinople. The afternoon sun still hangs above the rooftops, but its intensity has begun to soften. Light falls at a gentler angle, warming the stone surfaces without the sharp glare of midday. Dust drifts through the air in slow, settling motion. The guard takes deeper breaths now. The heat is no longer a weight on his chest, only a steady warmth. He walks past residences built for officials and court workers. Their walls rise high and smooth, punctuated by narrow windows and iron-bound doors. A woman sweeps the entrance of one home with slow strokes, gathering dust into a neat pile. A servant carries a basket of folded linens toward a courtyard. A child peers from a doorway before being gently pulled back inside. The district feels orderly in a way the markets do not. Even the voices here sound quieter, more measured. He approaches a colonnaded walkway that leads toward an elevated terrace. The columns cast long shadows that stretch across the pavement like rows of dark ribbons. As he steps beneath them, the temperature drops slightly. Shade moves across his face, relieving the warmth that has built through the day. A pair of scholars stands beneath the colonnade, speaking quietly as they unroll a parchment. One gestures toward a line of writing, tracing it with his finger while the other squints, adjusting the parchment to catch the light. They discuss something related to taxes or land divisions, common subjects in documents copied and reviewed near the palace complex. Administrative activity around the palace often involves scribes, scholars, and record keepers preparing documents for officials who manage city finances and provincial matters. A group of soldiers passes in formation, their sandals striking the pavement in a steady rhythm. Their shields reflect the sunlight in brief, bright flashes. The guard steps aside, nodding slightly as they move by. These soldiers appear to be heading toward the barracks near the palace entrance. Their faces are calm but focused. Drills and duties do not end even when the city shifts toward evening. He continues walking, passing a fountain shaped like a lion. Water spills from its mouth in a thin arc, landing in the basin with a soft splash. A man fills a jug, checking the water level before stepping away. Near the fountain, two older men rest on a stone bench, exchanging quiet remarks about the day's events. Their voices blend with the water's rhythm. Farther ahead, the guard reaches a large open square that serves as both meeting place and ceremonial space. Statues stand atop pedestals placed at regular intervals. Some depict past emperors. Others represent allegorical figures or ancient heroes. The surfaces of many statues show signs of age cracks, softened details, patches where weather has worn away intricate carvings. A group of boys plays near one of the pedestals. They toss a leather ball between them, shouting brief instructions. The ball strikes the pedestal once, producing a hollow thump. The boys freeze for a moment, glance toward the nearest soldier, and relax only when the soldier ignores them. This district often witnessed public ceremonies, triumphal processions, and imperial appearances, making it a central point for civic life. Over centuries, structures were expanded, altered, or replaced, leaving a layered architectural record that scholars still debate. The guard moves toward the edges of the square, where porticoed walkways lead toward the palace walls. The walls themselves rise tall and imposing, decorated with carved stone patterns and protected by guard towers at regular intervals. Light glances off the polished surfaces, creating a glow that seems almost deliberate. A line of petitioners waits near one of the side gates. They hold scrolls or letters, hoping to present requests to minor officials within the palace complex. Their expressions range from hopeful to weary. A clerk stands by the gate, recording names on a wax tablet with a stylus. He gestures occasionally, pointing people to the correct line or sending them away with brief explanations. The guard walks past them and toward a section of wall where carved reliefs display scenes of imperial authority processions, victories, and formal ceremonies. The details are precise. Folds of garments, the shape of shields, the expressions of attendants. He traces one of the carvings lightly with his fingertips. The stone feels warm. People around him continue their tasks. Couriers move quickly with sealed documents. Palace workers carry sacks of grain, folded banners, or wooden crates. A group of musicians heads toward a service entrance, their instruments wrapped in cloth. Even inside the palace district, the city's rhythm does not pause. A breeze carries the smell of salt and the distant hint of fish from the direction of the Sea of Marmara. The palace sits near the sea, and every shift in the wind brings reminders of the water beyond the city walls. The guard glances toward the southern edge of the district, where glimpses of blue water appear between the buildings. He continues toward a shaded corridor lined with fig trees. Their branches extend overhead, creating a canopy that softens the light further. Leaves rustle as the breeze moves through them. The guard appreciates the coolness here. The long walk through the city has warmed him again, and the shade offers welcome relief. At the far end of the corridor, he sees a small gathering of artisans restoring tiles along a wall. One carefully applies adhesive with a thin tool. Another presses a tile into place, adjusting it until the edges align perfectly with its neighbors. These colored tiles form part of a decorative border that stretches across the palace district. Some palace walls were adorned with intricate mosaic designs, combining colored stones, glass pieces, and ceramic tiles arranged in geometric and floral patterns. The artisans work quietly, glancing occasionally at the sun to judge how much time remains before evening. One wipes sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The guard pauses briefly, taking in the scene, the order, the measured activity, the structure that defines the palace district. Then he continues forward, following the path that leads deeper into the heart of the imperial quarter. The day begins to lean towards final hours. The city shifts with it. As the guard continues toward the southern edge of the palace district, the city begins its slow transition into evening. The light softens first, turning from bright gold to a deeper, warmer hue. Then the shadows stretch, sliding across the pavement in long shapes cast by columns, arches, and statues. The air cools slightly, though the stones still hold the warmth gathered through the day. He approaches the Hippodrome, the enormous chariot racing arena that defines this part of Constantinople. Even when empty, it has a presence that fills the space around it. The outer walls curve in sweeping lines, their surfaces marked by centuries of celebrations, riots, and ceremonies. The guard steps into the broad avenue leading toward its main entrance. The plaza outside the Hippodrome is busy with people finishing their day. A group of merchants folds up a canopy, shaking dust from the cloth before rolling it tightly. A man pulls a cart laden with leftover goods, its wheels squeaking over uneven stones. A woman closes the shutters of a small stall, securing them with a wooden latch. The guard hears laughter from a nearby bench where a few young men rest, their legs stretched out in front of them. They discuss a recent chariot race, mimicking the movements of the teams with exaggerated gestures. One insists his favorite driver was faster than the others. Another counters that skill matters more than speed. Their voices echo lightly in the open square. Chariot races were the most popular public entertainment in Constantinople, with teams supported by factions whose influence extended into politics and daily life. The guard's footsteps carry him closer to the base of the Egyptian obelisk, standing in the center of the Hippodrome spina. Even from outside the arena, its top rises clearly into the dimming light. Carvings cut into its surface catch the remaining sunlight, creating narrow bands of brightness along ancient stone. Near the obelisk, a man sells roasted chestnuts from a small brazier. The warm scent spreads outward, mixing with the smell of smoke and cooling stone. He shakes the pan with practiced ease, preventing the nuts from burning. The guard pauses briefly as the vendor hands a small paper cone to a waiting customer. Further ahead, a group of children chase one another near the base of a column. Their sandals slap rhythmically against the pavement as they weave between the adults. A boy trips, landing on his palms, and jumps up again with barely a pause. The guard watches them continue their game, full of energy that defies the length of the day. He moves along the outer wall of the Hippodrome. Relief panels embedded into the stone depict scenes of past emperors overseeing races, ceremonies, and victories. Parts of these carvings have worn away, leaving faint outlines where details once stood sharply. The guard runs a hand lightly along one panel, feeling the smoothness where time has softened the edges. A few workers sweep debris from the plaza bits of straw, leaves, and dust that have accumulated through the afternoon. Their brooms move in steady arcs, pushing everything into small piles. One of them pauses to straighten his back, pressing a hand into his side as if easing a familiar ache. Near the entrance to the Hippodrome, a pair of soldiers stands on duty. Their posture is alert but relaxed, the kind of stance practiced by men familiar with long hours of guarding. One adjusts his belt while the other glances at the sky. The sun's last light outlines the top of the arena in a thin band of orange. The guard exchanges a brief nod with them as he passes. He continues toward the row of statues lining the walkway. Many of the statues show figures in heroic poses, athletes, legendary heroes, and emperors depicted with deliberate grandeur. Some statues lean slightly from age, Others have missing limbs or chipped noses. The guard walks beside them, noting each figure as if greeting familiar faces. A debate among scholars concerns the exact number and arrangement of statues that once filled the Hippodrome. Written descriptions mention dozens of artworks, some brought from distant cities, but only a few remain in place today. He reaches a raised platform overlooking the arena interior. Even in the fading light, the shape of the track is visible, the long central barrier. The far curves, the positions where spectators once filled tiered stands. The space seems quiet now, but its history feels close, held in the stone and dust. The guard stands still, letting the quiet settle around him. The distant sound of waves reaches him faintly, carried from the Sea of Marmara. A breeze passes through the plaza, lifting the edges of discarded paper and sending them fluttering across the stones before settling again. Workers begin lighting lamps along the nearby streets. The faint glow spreads slowly, creating warm pools of light beneath porticos and long walkways. These early lamps use simple oil and wick, producing a flame that flickers gently in the evening air. A woman carrying a basket of bread walks past him, headed home. She hums softly to herself. A man leading a donkey follows behind her, the animal moving with tired steps. From a side alley, two musicians are holding a drum, the other a stringed lyre preparing to play somewhere deeper in the district. Evening brings a relaxed energy to the Hippodrome area. The noise of the day softens, replaced by slower voices and unhurried footsteps. People move toward their homes, toward food, toward rest. The guard steps away from the viewing platform and walks along the paved road leading toward the sea-facing side of the district. Lamps continue to brighten around him. The sky has shifted fully now, the last golden light replaced by a deepening blue. A few early stars appear overhead. He moves forward, following the rhythm of the evening. The city begins to glow gently around him, preparing for night. The guard leaves the Hippodrome district behind as the colors of the sky deepen. What was once gold is now a soft gradient of rose fading into blue. Lamps glow steadily along the main streets, and the activity of the city shifts toward the quieter rhythm of evening. He walks toward the direction of the sea where the harbor district lies, a place that never truly rests, not even at dusk. The descent toward the water brings a noticeable change in scent. Warm air from inland mixes with the cooler breath of the sea. Salt rises faintly off the waves. Tar from boats lingers in the air. Fishmongers cleaning their final catches add sharper notes to the mixture. These smells layer on top of one another, familiar and constant. The guard passes narrow homes built close together, their windows open to let out the day's heat. From inside, soft voices drift into the street families preparing evening meals, children speaking in half whispers, a few scattered laughs. In one home, someone plays a stringed instrument, the melody simple and unhurried. A dog trots ahead, pausing occasionally to sniff the ground. When it finds nothing interesting, it resumes its path with the determined pace of a creature that knows every corner of the district. The street widens as the guard approaches the harbor. Light from lanterns reflects across the cobblestones in uneven patterns. People move in and out of the last open shops, sailmakers rolling up fabric. Rope merchants sorting coiled lines, tavern keepers propping open their doors for the night's customers. He passes a tavern where the scent of roasted fish drifts through the doorway. Inside, voices rise in loose, easy conversation. Workers sit with bowls of stew and cups of thin wine. A sailor leans back in his chair, telling a story so dramatically that even those uninterested glance in his direction to catch pieces of it. The guard continues walking, letting the noise blend into the evening. Farther ahead, the harbor opens wide. The first view of it at dusk is always striking. Dark outlines of ships form jagged silhouettes against the last pale strip of light on the horizon. Masts rise like tall, thin columns. Ropes creak as they shift, moved by the tide. Water laps steadily at the stone quays, creating a rhythmic sound that travels easily through the quieting air. Merchants remain active even at this hour. One oversees the unloading of jars sealed with wax, directing workers with short gestures. Another supervises bundles of wool being stacked beneath a canopy. A third checks lists scratched into a wax tablet, the stylus flying across the surface with quick precision. The harbor served as one of the most important trade points in the region, receiving goods from across the Mediterranean, the Black Sea, and beyond. A fisherman sits at the edge of the quay repairing a net. His hands move automatically, looping string through gaps with practiced ease. He squints occasionally at the dim light, but his fingers never hesitate. A lantern hangs beside him, swaying slightly in the breeze and casting shifting patterns across the net. Nearby, a boy scrubs the deck of a small boat with a brush. Every few strokes, he stops to stretch his fingers. The water in the bucket beside him ripples with each movement. A man, likely his father, tightens a rope on the bow before dropping it into a coil. Voices rise from the farther end of the quay where sailors prepare a vessel for departure. They lift sacks, adjust sails, check knots. Someone shouts an instruction, and several others repeat it automatically. A lantern glows at the ship's stern, its light catching briefly on the water before stretching into a shimmering line. A guard walks alongside crates stacked neatly beside a warehouse. Marks painted on their surfaces indicate where the goods inside came from. Olive from the west, pottery from inland workshops, dried fruits from distant valleys, amphorae of oil sealed tightly for transport. Dock workers begin to close the warehouse doors. They slide a thick beam across the handles, securing it for the night. One worker wipes sweat from his forehead, even though the heat has faded. Long days leave their own weight on the body. As the guard continues, he passes the harbor taverns, small establishments where sailors gather after work. The smell of wine and grilled meat floats through the open doors. Laughter spills into the street. A musician plays a simple rhythm on a drum, keeping the beat steady. Another plucks a lyre, the notes soft and wandering. At the corner closest to the water, a group of men sits around a low table, playing a game with carved pieces. They move the pieces quickly, occasionally slapping one onto the board for emphasis. A small crowd watches, commenting quietly on strategy. A historian debate concerns the exact layout of the harbor during different periods. Some sources depict multiple distinct basins dedicated to different types of ship, while others describe a more integrated structure with flexible mooring areas. Archaeological evidence shows changes over time, suggesting that the harbor evolved in response to growing trade and shifting needs. The guard approaches a narrow pier that extends into the water. Planks creak lightly beneath his steps. Standing at the edge, he looks out across the darkening sea. The surface glitters faintly under the rising stars. A few lanterns float gently from boats moored farther out, their reflections trembling with the movement of the tide. He listens for a moment, waves tapping softly against wood, ropes tightening and loosening, a distant call from a sailor, the muted hum of the city behind him. Evening has settled fully over Constantinople. The sky deepens into indigo, lamps burn in a slow, steady glow. Ships rest, workers head home. The guard takes in the scene before turning away from the pier. His route leads back into the streets toward the final stretch of the day. The night waits ahead. The guard turns away from the harbor as the last traces of daylight disappear. Night gathers gently, not sharply, settling over the city like a long, cool veil. Lanterns burn steadily along the streets, their flames wavering in the mild breeze drifting from the water. The air carries a mixture of scents, cooled stone, faint smoke from evening cook fires, traces of sea salt. The noise of the city changes again. Voices lower. Footsteps slow. The rhythms that carried the day begin to dissolve into quieter patterns. He walks past modest homes clustered along narrow lanes. Windows glow with lamplight. Inside, silhouettes shift families eating simple meals, mothers settling children to rest, old men seated near doorways speaking in unhurried tones. A cat stretches across a windowsill, blinking lazily at the passing guard before curling into a tight circle. A woman stands outside her home, pouring water from a jug into a small basin. The water splashes softly against the clay. She rinses her hands, shakes off droplets, and steps inside. The door closes with a muted creak. A short distance away, two neighbors exchange quiet greetings, their conversation wrapped in the calm of the hour. Farther along the street, a baker sweeps the entrance of his shop. He prepares dough for early the next morning, shaping loaves in the dim light. The scent of yeast drifts faintly into the air. Bakers often worked between night and dawn, using the cooler hours to heat their ovens before sunrise. The guard turns toward a wider avenue where the lamps glow more brightly. This path leads uphill, offering a view of the city spreading out below. As he ascends, the sounds change again. The distant clatter of markets fades completely. In its place, he hears the soft thrum of waves breaking against the harbor walls, and the occasional echo of boots on stone. At a small square halfway up the hill, a group of musicians sits beneath an archway. One plucks a stringed instrument with slow, measured strokes. Another taps a small drum, keeping a steady rhythm. The melody is simple and repetitive, fitting the pace of the evening. A few listeners gather nearby, leaning against columns or sitting cross-legged on the pavement. No one speaks. The music fills the space with quiet warmth. The guard stays for a brief moment before continuing upward. Lanterns placed at regular intervals cast circular pools of light across the pavement. Shadows stretch and shrink as he walks. The stone beneath his boots has cooled, holding only the memory of the day's heat. He reaches the crest of the hill and pauses. Below him, Constantinople extends in layered darkness. Lamps trace the lines of major streets. The roofs of homes form uneven shapes that blend into one another. The sea reflects scattered light from the harbor and shimmers softly. The distant walls stand as darker outlines against the night sky. A few domes catch the moonlight, their curved surfaces faintly luminous. Towers punctuate the skyline. From somewhere near the palace district, a late messenger hurries along, his sandals tapping lightly as he runs. The guard descends the hill toward another residential district where quiet is deeper still. A dog sleeps curled in the shadow of a stairway. A man extinguishes a lantern outside his home, tapping the wick lightly before shutting the door. He turns onto a narrow lane bordered by gardens. The leaves of vines rustle gently in the breeze. A faint fragrance rises from a fig tree nearby. The lane leads to a small courtyard where an old fountain trickles steadily. Water falls from a stone spout into a shallow basin with a soft, constant sound. The courtyard serves as a restful place for neighbors to gather in the last hours of the day. An elderly man sits on a bench near the fountain. He nods lightly as the guard passes. The guard returns the gesture. No words are exchanged. None are needed. He makes his way toward the final stretch of his route. Lamps grow fewer here, leaving the shapes of buildings defined mostly by moonlight. The hum of the city becomes a low, distant murmur. His steps no longer echo. They are absorbed by the stillness around him. A historian debate concerns the extent of public lighting available in Constantinople at night. Some records suggest well-lit main streets, while others describe large sections of the city remaining in shadow once the sun set. Evidence points to variation depending on district, wealth, and proximity to major roads. The guard walks past a row of storage sheds where workers earlier in the day had unloaded sacks of grain. The scent of the grain lingers faintly. A piece of broken pottery lies near one of the sheds, catching a sliver of moonlight. He steps around it. Ahead, the road widens again, merging into a larger thoroughfare that leads back toward barracks and administrative buildings. Night guards move along the path, their torches flickering orange. He nods as he passes them. Their rounds are just beginning. He approaches the final plaza on his route. A single lamp burns in the center, surrounded by benches. A few late walkers cross the space, their movements slow. One adjusts the cloak around his shoulders. Another carries a small basket covered with cloth. A pair of servants heads toward the palace district with deliberate steps, likely delivering a message or supplies. The guard stands still for a moment, taking in the quiet scene. The city that had roared through the morning, hummed through the afternoon, and bustled through the evening now rests in a softened state. Constantinople at night is not silent, but its sound is gentle light footsteps, muted voices, distant waves. He turns toward his final destination. The barracks are only a short walk away now. A single torch burns by the entrance, casting warm light across the stone wall. As he approaches, the familiar rhythm of his day settles fully around him. His body carries the fatigue of long hours, but his steps remain steady. He reaches the doorway. The day has ended. The city exhales into night. Night settles fully over the city, and the pace of everything slows into something soft and steady. The sounds that remain drift gently through the air, distant footsteps fading along stone corridors. A lone dog shifting in its sleep, the quiet pulse of waves brushing against the harbor walls. Lamps burn low, their flames swaying lightly as the breeze moves past them, casting thin, trembling shapes across the ground. Constantinople, so bright and restless through the day, relaxes now into a quieter shape, a city wrapped in shadow and cool air. The guard moves toward his resting place, each step slower than the one before. The stones beneath his feet feel smoother in the dim light, their warmth from the day long faded. The night breeze carries the faintest hints of the sea, mixed with the soft fragrance of distant gardens and the lingering smoke of evening fires. Even the animals of the city seem calmer, horses settling in their stalls, birds quiet in their perches, street dogs curled into stillness along shaded walls. Somewhere far off, a late bell rings once, clear and gentle, before silence folds over the sound. The city takes on a slower breath. Lanterns flicker behind lattice windows. Curtains shift as the wind brushes against open doorways. In the distance, the faint glow of the great palace softens into the dark, its outlines blending with the sky. The guard feels the weight of the day ease from his shoulders. Muscles loosen, thoughts slow. The long walk across the city, from morning markets to evening streets, slips behind him like a completed circle. He reaches his quarters, pushes the door open, and steps inside, leaving the night to continue its quiet watch outside. Here, in the stillness, everything feels gentler, softer, steady enough to rest.